Do you remember the first time you cried in front of someone and immediately felt embarrassed? Maybe it happened during an argument. Maybe it was while watching a sad movie. Or maybe it was simply when someone said something a little harsh to you. And almost instantly, a familiar voice appeared. Don't be so sensitive. Don't be so weak. What is there to cry about? If you are someone who cries easily, you have probably heard sentences like that hundreds of times throughout your life. Eventually, you start believing that something must be wrong with you. You tell yourself that you need to be stronger, tougher, more like the people who can stand there calm as stone even when the world around them is falling apart. But let me tell you something that very few people have ever told you. Maybe the problem is not that you are too weak. Maybe the problem is that you feel more than others. Neuroscience suggests that about 20% of the population has a nervous system that is especially sensitive to emotions and the surrounding environment. These people do not just see the world, they experience it more deeply, more clearly, and sometimes more painfully. When others see a normal conversation, they can sense the atmosphere, the tension, and the emotions that have not even been spoken out loud. In other words, while most people are experiencing life in normal emotional resolution, your brain might be recording everything in extremely high emotional resolution. And that explains something many people misunderstand. People who cry easily are often not the weakest people in the room. Very often, they are the ones who care the most. They do not cry because they are fragile. They cry because they care. But here's the part that most people have never heard before. There are 3 very specific mechanisms in the brain that cause some people to experience everything more deeply than others. And once you understand these 3 mechanisms, you may start looking at yourself in a completely different way. So before we continue, if you have ever been called too sensitive, stay until the end of this video, because there is a good chance that the thing you always believed was your weakness might actually be one of the most powerful abilities of the human brain. Have you ever wondered why just one careless comment from someone can stay in your mind all day, sometimes even all week? While other people hear it and forget it almost immediately, you take it home with you. You bring it to bed. You replay it in your mind like a movie that refuses to stop. If that sounds familiar, there's a good chance your brain is operating very differently from most people's. And once you understand this, you may realize that your tears are not a sign of weakness. They are signals from a nervous system that is working at a deeper level. Imagine that the human brain is like a camera. Most people record life in a fairly decent resolution, like a 720p video. The image is clear enough to understand what is happening, but the system ignores many small details to save energy. But for some people, especially those who are easily moved emotionally, their brain records the world in extremely high emotional resolution. Everything feels sharper. Sounds seem clearer. Emotional signals feel stronger. And when you experience the world in that way, life simply feels more intense. This begins with a very interesting feature of the brain. Most human brains are designed with a natural filter. This filter helps ignore most information that is not important. For example, the quiet hum of an air conditioner, a light that flickers slightly, or small changes in someone's tone of voice. For most people, the brain simply decides that these things are not important and filters them out. But for sensitive people, that filter tends to be weaker. They do not ignore as many things. That means when they walk into a room, they notice much more. They hear the faint sound of a chair being pulled. They see that someone is smiling, but their eyes are not happy. They can sense tension in the air, even before anyone says a word. And when you constantly receive that much emotional information, feeling overwhelmed from time to time is completely natural. Not because you are weak, but because your system is processing more data. But here is where it becomes even more interesting. Inside our brains, there's a system called mirror neurons. These are the nerve cells that allow humans to empathize with each other. Because of them, when you see someone in pain, you can understand that they are hurting. But in sensitive people, this system often works more strongly than usual. That means they do not just understand other people's emotions. They almost experience them. When you see someone who is sad, your chest may feel heavy. When someone gets hurt, you may feel pain on their behalf. And sometimes, tears appear not because you are weak, but because your nervous system is reacting to someone else's emotions as if they were happening to you. That is why many sensitive people feel like emotional sponges. When they walk into a joyful room, they immediately feel lighter. But when they enter a tense environment, they can feel heavy, even if nothing has happened yet. Their brain is constantly scanning the environment like an emotional radar that never turns off. There is another trait that often makes people who cry easily different. It is the way they process information. Many people react quickly to the world. They hear a sentence and respond right away. They face a situation and act immediately. But sensitive people often pause a little longer. They think, they analyze, they try to feel the meaning behind the words. Sometimes this makes them feel slower than others. But in reality, their brain is doing something very complex. It is connecting the current experience with old memories, with emotions, and with predictions about the future. It is running a mental simulation to understand what is really happening. And sometimes the result of that process is emotion spilling out. So if you have ever cried during an argument or felt deeply moved by a story, it does not necessarily mean you lost control. It may simply mean you are emotionally invested in what is happening. You care. You are paying attention. And honestly, in a world that is becoming more and more indifferent, that is not a bad thing. But the big question remains. If sensitivity sometimes makes life harder, why did evolution keep this trait? Why, for thousands of years, have there always been people who feel so deeply? The answer lies in how humans lived in the past. Imagine an ancient tribe. In that tribe, there were brave people, those willing to hunt and face danger. They were the warriors. But if the entire tribe consisted only of warriors, they might rush into danger without thinking. They might miss the signs of an approaching storm. They might fail to notice that a neighboring tribe was preparing to betray them. That is where sensitive individuals became incredibly important. They were the observers. They noticed small changes in the environment. They sensed when something was wrong. They were like an early warning system for the entire community. In other words, human history was not built only by the strongest people. It was also built by the people who felt the deepest. And if you recognize yourself in this group, there is something very important you should understand. You do not need to turn yourself into a cold person. You do not need to force yourself to become emotionally numb just to fit into the world. The world already has too many people like that. What you need to learn is not how to shut down your emotions. What you need to learn is how your brain works so you can protect your energy and use your sensitivity as a strength. And in the next part of this video, we will talk about something that very few people have ever explained to you. Why sensitive people often feel exhausted in the modern world. And more importantly, how you can turn your sensitive nervous system into an advantage instead of a burden. If you have ever felt like you are too sensitive for this world, keep watching. The next part might help you see yourself in a completely different way. There is something that very few people have ever told you directly. You may have spent years trying to become less emotional, less sensitive, less likely to cry, just to fit into this world. But there is another possibility that you may have never considered. Maybe the world does not need you to become colder. Maybe the world actually needs more people like you. The truth is, a society made up only of indifferent people would become a very dangerous place. When no one can feel another person's pain anymore, cruelty starts to become normal. When no one is moved by injustice, wrong things can exist without resistance. And that is exactly why people who feel deeply are more important than they realize. People who cry easily are often the ones who truly care. They care about people. They care about truth. They care about the things many others are simply too busy to notice. And yes, sometimes that makes their lives a little more difficult. Their nervous system is like a high-performance engine. It is powerful, but it also heats up faster. But real strength is not about never crying. Real strength is about feeling things deeply and still continuing to live, continuing to love, and continuing to care about this world. So the next time someone tells you that you are too sensitive, remember one simple thing. You are not overreacting. You are simply feeling more. And if you recognize yourself as someone like this, do one small thing right now. Subscribe to the channel and watch the next video. Because there is another secret about the brain of sensitive people that most people have never heard. And once you understand it, you may never look at your sensitivity the same way again.